I refused to obey the CEO's spoiled son, and by the next morning, my career was over. But what they didn't know, I had already built the perfect way to expose everything they were hiding. My name is Riley, and on March 12th, I found out just how dangerous it can be when a rich, entitled heir thinks everyone is supposed to obey him. That morning started like any other Wednesday. I was already in my office by 7:30 a.m., holding a latte macchiato and sorting through quarterly reports for our biggest client, the same one that had pulled this company back from the edge of bankruptcy 2 years earlier. Then my door flew open. Dominic Hayes walked in like he owned the place. 18 years old, the CEO's son, and already acting like the world owed him respect he'd never earned. His designer suit hung awkwardly on him, but his attitude was anything but uncertain. His eyes burned with that reckless, arrogant anger you only see in someone who's never been told no and never had to face consequences. "You think you can ignore me?" he snapped, slamming his fist down on my desk like he was issuing a royal decree. "When I give an order, you follow it." I didn't move. I stayed seated, calm and collected like I always did. "Dominic," I said evenly, "I don't take orders from interns." His face flushed instantly, his ego clearly bruised. "I'm the future CEO. You'll regret talking to me like that." I raised an eyebrow, completely unfazed. "Then we'll deal with that when you actually become CEO. Until then." I gestured politely toward the door. "Please leave my office." The look he gave me was pure venom. Shocked, humiliated, and furious that someone had dared to stand their ground. I knew in that moment he wouldn't forget it. People like Dominic never do. What I didn't expect was how quickly he'd try to retaliate. But to really understand how it got that bad, I have to take you back a few months. That's when our CEO, David Hayes, proudly announced that his son would be joining the company to gain experience. Most of us assumed Dominic would float around for a couple of weeks, pretend to learn something, then disappear back to whatever luxury bubble he came from. We couldn't have been more wrong. Instead, Dominic was handed the title of Junior Operations Director, a position I had worked 6 long years to earn. He got it without experience, without qualifications, and without even the most basic understanding of how the company functioned. And somehow in his mind, that made him my boss. At first, I played along. I corrected his mistakes quietly so no one else had to deal with the fallout. I fixed his sloppy, reckless proposals before they ever reached a client. I even covered for him when he skipped deadlines or simply didn't show up. Why? Because I cared about my career. Because I believed in what I had built here. And maybe deep down, I thought he'd eventually grow up. That was my mistake. The breaking point came about a week and a half before that Wednesday morning. Dominic stormed into my office without knocking, dropped a file onto my desk like it was trash, and said, "Fire the Miller team. They annoyed me." I stared at him for a second, making sure I'd heard that right. The Miller team, my team, had just secured a $3.7 million contract for the company. "I'm not firing anyone because they annoyed you," I said calmly, keeping my tone steady. His expression twisted into something ugly and smug. "Fine. I'll just tell my father you refused a direct order." I met his gaze without blinking. "Go ahead." He didn't like that. Not at all. He turned and stormed out, clearly expecting me to panic or chase after him. I didn't. At the time, I thought that would be the end of it. I assumed his father would finally step in and put him in his place. But I had seriously underestimated just how far arrogance and a lifetime of being protected could go. Then came the annual March Gala. I was there representing our international clients, the division I had built from the ground up over 7 years. The venue sparkled. The investors were happy, and for a brief moment, everything felt right. Like maybe all the hard work actually meant something. And then my phone buzzed. One message. From David Hayes. "Riley, please come to my office first thing tomorrow morning." My stomach dropped. I barely slept that night. By 8 a.m., I was standing in front of David's desk. Well, he looked uncomfortable, avoiding my eyes like he already knew what was coming. Riley, I'm afraid I have to. I cut him off before he could finish. Check your inbox first. That got his attention. His face went pale almost instantly, because what he didn't know was that I had been documenting everything. David Hayes stared at his screen like it might explode. His fingers hesitated over the mouse before he finally clicked open the folder I'd sent him the night before. Inside were 44 forwarded emails, every single one from Dominic. Some of them were embarrassing, others were far worse. There were messages where Dominic ordered departments to falsify delivery reports, emails demanding the finance team adjust numbers so his projections looked better. And then there were the ones he sent directly to me, arrogant, threatening, and completely unfiltered. Just do what I say, or I'll make sure you're out. I stood there quietly, letting the weight of it sink in. Eventually, David leaned back in his chair, a heavy sigh escaping him. I had no idea, he said. I crossed my arms, meeting his gaze. Didn't you? He flinched, because the truth was he had known, at least enough to suspect. But it's easy to ignore warning signs when it's your son causing the problem. Easy to look the other way when the consequences don't land directly on you. Until they do. He rubbed his face, clearly shaken now. Riley, why didn't you come to me sooner? I kept my voice steady, controlled. Because I believed this company valued merit. And because I didn't want to be the reason your family fell apart. He looked up at me, and this time there was something real in his eyes, fear mixed with guilt. My board can never see this. I held his gaze, unshaken. I'm not here to threaten you, David. I'm here because your son walked into my office yesterday morning and demanded I fire a team that just brought in $3.7 million. And when I refused, I paused, letting the moment hang. He promised to destroy my career. I let that hang in the air for a second so he could really feel it. I'm here because I won't sit back and watch an 18-year-old treat people poorly while you ignore it. The room went quiet. The only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioner. Then David finally spoke, his voice low. What do you want? I gave a small, controlled smile. I want my career. I want the Miller team protected. And I want this nonsense shut down before it explodes in your face. As for Dominic, I shrugged slightly. That's your problem. I walked out of his office with my heart racing, but my posture steady. At that point, it wasn't about revenge. Not yet. It was about fairness, about proving that hard work still meant something. But by Monday morning, it was clear Dominic wasn't done. It started quietly. Whispers in the hallway. Emails I was suddenly excluded from. Meetings being moved without telling me. Budget approvals that used to take hours now dragging on for days. The kind of quiet, calculated sabotage that's meant to wear you down without leaving fingerprints. One morning, I saw Dominic standing outside a strategy meeting I hadn't been invited to. He looked straight at me, slow smile spreading across his face. And then he winked, like it was all some kind of game. That's the thing about people like Dominic. They think power is something they can twist and rig however they want. They believe rules don't apply to them. What they never understand is that the people they try to push aside are often the ones holding everything together. A week later, David called me back into his office. You were right, he said quietly. Dominic's out of control. I lifted an eyebrow. Good. So you've dealt with him. David hesitated, then looked away. I tried. He won't listen. He said if I don't get rid of you, he'll go to the board and make things difficult. I let out a soft laugh, shaking my head. 18 years old and already threatening board action. That's bold. David didn't smile. Riley, I'm going to have to suspend you. Temporarily. Just until things calm down. It's not personal. I looked at him, completely still. It's never personal, is it? He flinched at that. I'll fix this, he said quickly. I promise. But I already knew the truth. He wasn't going to stand up to his son. He was going to sacrifice me, the person who built his entire international division, because it was easier than confronting the monster he'd created. I nodded once, polite and composed, then walked out with my head held high. I wasn't defeated, because what David didn't know was that I had been preparing for this for months. As I left his office, I felt calm. Not angry. Not shocked. Just clear. I had learned a long time ago that in corporate life, loyalty fades the moment pressure shows up, especially when family is involved. But what neither David nor Dominic understood was that I wasn't alone. While they had been busy pushing me out, I had been building something else entirely. 2 months before Dominic ever stormed into my office, I had already started noticing the shifts. Clients were becoming uneasy. Senior managers were asking questions that didn't quite add up. Partnerships I had personally negotiated were suddenly being reassigned without explanation. It didn't take much to figure it out. Dominic was positioning himself. He wanted control of the international division, the one I had built from nothing, and David was letting him. So I did the one thing they never expected. I started documenting everything, every email, every meeting note, every client complaint about Dominic's behavior. I kept a clean, organized record of every reckless decision he made, and every time David quietly allowed it to slide. But I wasn't naive enough to keep all of that to myself. I reached out to 2 people I trusted more than anyone else in the company. Sarah Lynn, our head of compliance, and Julian Castro, our senior legal counsel. Both of them had worked with me for years. Both of them had already shown concern about Dominic, even if they hadn't said it out loud in meetings. We met off the record over coffee. I laid everything out in front of them. At first, Sarah just shook her head slowly. Riley, this could destroy careers. Julian nodded. If the board sees this, I looked at both of them, steady and certain. They need to see it. Not for me, for the company. There was a long silence. Then Sarah leaned forward. I'm in. Julian gave a short nod. Me too. That's when things got serious. We spent late nights going through contracts Dominic had interfered with. We tracked compliance violations that could have triggered investigations. Julian drafted confidential memos outlining potential breaches of fiduciary duty and exactly who could be held responsible. Sarah uncovered something even worse. One of Dominic's so-called special projects had nearly pushed us into violating international trade laws. If I hadn't quietly stepped in a month earlier, the damage could have been catastrophic. By the time David decided to suspend me, I wasn't worried, because the board wasn't going to hear about Dominic's behavior from me. They were going to hear it from compliance and legal. But that wasn't the only piece I had in place. The final move involved our largest international client, Potomac Capital Partners. I had built that relationship myself from the ground up, and I knew they were already uneasy after Dominic led a disastrous meeting without me. So I reached out to Ashley Kim, their head of partnerships. We met for lunch. No pressure, no agenda, but when I casually asked about their future plans, Ashley gave me a look that told me everything before she even spoke. Riley, off the record. If you're gone, so are we. I blinked, caught off guard. You're serious? She nodded without hesitation. We don't partner with companies run by amateurs. That was all I needed to hear. The moment my suspension hit the internal email system, 2 things happened at the exact same time. Sarah and Julian submitted their joint report directly to the board, and Potomac Capital Partners sent a formal letter to David Hayes, polite on the surface but with a very clear warning underneath. If leadership didn't change, they would reconsider future business. I wish I could say I felt some kind of victory in that moment. But honestly, I just felt ready. Dominic Hayes had spent months acting like he could push me out with threats and tantrums, like everything and everyone around him existed for his convenience. What he never understood was simple. You can't intimidate someone who has nothing left to lose and everything worth fighting for. The official notice went out at 9:03 a.m. on Thursday. Riley Wu, administrative leave, pending internal review. No explanation, no context, just a cold, lifeless sentence meant to erase me from the company overnight. But what David didn't realize, the real review had already begun, and it wasn't about me. At 10:16 a.m., Sarah and Julian submitted their report to the board of directors. It wasn't dramatic. No emotional language, no accusations thrown around. Just facts. Clear, precise, undeniable. Dominic Hayes had attempted to manipulate financial data more than once. He had issued directives far beyond his authority, putting contracts at risk. He had interfered with compliance procedures, and David Hayes, whether through negligence or willful blindness, had allowed it to continue. The report ended with one simple recommendation: immediate review of leadership accountability and potential breaches of fiduciary duty. By 11:20 a.m., the boardroom was locked down. I wasn't there, of course, but Sarah kept me updated. David looks like he aged 15 years in an hour. Dominic tried to pin it on you. It didn't land. The board isn't buying anything he's saying. They want answers. I read each message calmly, almost detached. I hadn't gone to the board myself. I hadn't leaked anything. I didn't need to. The truth has a way of surfacing on its own. Around 1 p.m., David called me. I let it ring. He called again and again. By the fourth time, I finally answered. Riley, we need to talk. I let a brief pause stretch between us. About my suspension? I asked calmly. He exhaled, tension clear in his voice. About everything. We met later that afternoon. For once, Dominic wasn't lurking nearby, trying to control the room with his usual smug presence. David looked different. The polished, confident CEO was gone. In his place was a man who looked worn down and exposed. The board wants to meet with you tomorrow morning, he said quietly. I nodded once. Then he hesitated before adding, they've asked for Dominic's immediate resignation and for me to step down temporarily while they review everything. I didn't react. That sounds appropriate. He gave a hollow, bitter smile. You really did it. You destroyed him. I didn't destroy anyone. Dominic did that himself. I just refused to keep covering for him. For a second, I thought he might snap. But instead, he just sagged forward like the weight finally caught up with him. You were the best thing this company had, he said quietly. I should have stood behind you. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. The next morning, I walked into a boardroom I had never been invited into before. 11 directors sat around the table, their expressions serious, their eyes sharp. But the moment I took my seat, the tone shifted. They didn't interrogate me. They didn't accuse me. They asked me to speak. And I did. Calmly, clearly, professionally. I walked them through the deals I had secured, the partnerships I had protected, and the risks I had quietly neutralized, many of them caused directly by Dominic's reckless decisions. As I spoke, I could see it landing, heads nodding, notes being taken. They weren't looking for someone to blame. They were looking for someone who knew what they were doing. By the end of the meeting, the chairman leaned forward. Riley, we'd like you to step in as interim head of the international division while we restructure. For a moment, I almost didn't process it. I hadn't just been cleared. I had been elevated. But even as I shook hands and accepted with a polite smile, I stayed grounded. Titles come and go, positions change, power shifts, but respect, that has to be earned. And it's the one thing Dominic Hayes would never be able to buy back. 3 weeks later, he was gone. No farewell message. No announcement. Just gone. The rumors said he'd been sent overseas to manage family investments. Quiet exile, dressed up as opportunity. As for David Hayes, he stepped down voluntarily, citing personal reasons. The company memo praised his years of service and his commitment to a smooth transition. corporate language for leave quietly and we won't make this public. On my first official day as interim director, I walked past Dominic's old corner office. It was empty, just a nameplate left behind on the desk. I didn't stop. I didn't smile. Because this was never about proving a point. It was about protecting the people who had been quietly risking their careers while working under his chaos. I called my team into a meeting. No speeches, no celebrating. No, we won, just the truth. I don't care about titles, I told them, and I don't care about last names. What matters here is the work, integrity, and respect. That's how we move forward, together. For the first time in weeks, I saw something real on their faces. Relief. 2 months later, Potomac Capital Partners renewed their contract. Not because we chased them or begged, because Ashley Kim called me herself. We want to work with leaders who actually know what they're doing, she said. That's you. After that, everything started falling back into place. Other clients followed. Deals began closing again. The tension lifted. The company didn't just stabilize. It started growing, stronger than before. Then came something I didn't expect. The board invited me to a private dinner. I wasn't sure what to make of it at first, but sitting across from people who once saw me as just another department head, I could feel the shift. They weren't evaluating me anymore. They were considering me as a leader. The chairman spoke first. Riley, we'd like to offer you the permanent position of Vice President of International Operations, effective immediately. I didn't respond right away. I let the moment settle. Then I looked at him and said calmly, I have conditions. He smiled slightly. Let's hear them. And I gave them exactly what I needed. 0 tolerance for nepotism in leadership roles. Clear, transparent accountability for every executive. And full authority to build and protect my team my way. No hesitation. No apology. The chairman nodded after each point. Agreed. I signed the contract 5 days later. Not for the title. Not even for the salary. But because I wanted to make sure no one else would ever have to fight just to be treated with basic respect. As for Dominic, the last thing I heard, he was in London, trying to run some startup, burning through his trust fund, putting on the same arrogant act, still convinced he could bluff his way into success. But people saw through him now, because outside his father's shadow, there was nothing real behind it. And David? Well, he disappeared just as quietly as his son's influence did. In the end, both of them learned the same thing the hard way. When your power is built on entitlement and intimidation, it only works as long as people tolerate it. The moment someone refuses, it all falls apart. Looking back, everything became clear. Dominic tried to ruin my career because I wouldn't obey him. David chose to sacrifice me because he didn't have the courage to stand up to his own son, but neither of them ever understood what real power actually is. It's not a title, it's not a last name, and it's definitely not fear. Real power comes from knowing what you're doing, from standing your ground when it matters, and from earning the trust of the people who choose to stand with you. And that's something no arrogant heir and no weak CEO can ever fake.